Good afternoon and welcome to the continuation of our series of virtual roadshows on our new relationship with the EU. Our last session looked at rules of origin and the implications for importing and exporting. Today we'll be drilling down and looking into how the EU-UK deal works in terms of trading with Northern Ireland. Firstly, we'll be joined by Elly Paterson, Northern Ireland Stakeholder Engagement Lead at HMRC, and then by Stephen Kelly, Chief Executive of the trade body Manufacturing NI. There'll be a short Q&A session at the end of each of the presentations. However, before we begin, just a few very quick housekeeping items to note. All attendees are in listening mode only, and only the panelists' videos are visible. If you wish to engage with panelists or to ask a question, you can do so by typing your question into the Q&A box in the Zoom control bar at the bottom of your screen. So do use the Q&A and not the chat, because we won't be using that today. Aaron and I will be moderating the questions during the Q&A sessions, which will follow each of our two presentations today. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the website afterwards, and we'll be sharing slides with everybody who's attending today. Thanks ever so much, Elly.
Thank you very much, Hilary, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the session today and giving me this opportunity to come and do a walkthrough of the requirements under the Northern Ireland Protocol for moving goods into Northern Ireland. Aaron, if we can move to the next slide, please. I'll just sort of set a bit of background before we go into the detail, and then what I'm going to do is walk us through the different processes for different goods movements based upon different kind of goods flows. So looking at kind of goods going into Northern Ireland, coming out of Northern Ireland, and work through each one. I'm also going to cover how the at-risk rules work for goods entering Northern Ireland, and some of the bits around how the UK-EU trade agreement works in this context as well. As Hilary said, there will be opportunity for questions afterwards, so if you do have questions about any part of the presentation or anything else about the protocol, then do please pop those into the Q&A. So just to kind of set the scene, as hopefully you already know, the protocol was signed as part of the withdrawal agreement, and it has been designed to resolve the problem of having a hard border on the island of Ireland. So what it does is it achieves that through putting in place a series of different requirements for goods flows into and out of Northern Ireland, the fundamental kind of underpinning of which is that once goods are on the island of Ireland, there should be no different processes as they move around within that. What it also has also committed to is the unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to the whole of the UK market. And this is one of the areas that I'll cover and talk about, is how unfettered access actually works in practice. It also ensures that there are no tariffs on goods that remain within the UK customs territory. So Northern Ireland is and remains part of the UK customs territory. And what the protocol does is puts in place different elements that enable that to continue to happen, but also reflects that goods that may be at risk or may move into the EU do need to pay tariffs on entry to the EU, where they are going into the EU. So we'll go through that as well, and how that works in terms of the at-risk rules, because the at-risk rules are very much about determining if there should be a tariff on a good entering Northern Ireland, and what that means in terms of also mitigating any implications of tariffs for goods that are staying within the UK. So can we move to the next slide, please, and we'll start working through those different flows. So I'll start with the most simple, and that is goods flows between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So as I've already said, what the protocol does, it means there's no hard border, there's no physical infrastructure on the island of Ireland, there are no new checks and processes, and no customs duties and tariffs. And what this means in practical terms is whether you move your goods into the island of Ireland and they enter via one of the Irish ports, or they enter via one of the Northern Ireland ports, once they have completed the customs processes, one of those 2 points, they are free to move within the island of Ireland. So there'll be no different processes, and customs processes don't occur at any kind of later point in time. What this also means is that once goods are on the island of Ireland and have been cleared through all of the customs processes, they can move on elsewhere in the EU as well without needing further processes. That continues to operate as it did before the UK left the EU. So that's the kind of the start point. And if we can move to the next slide, please. So the next flow to think about is the Northern Ireland to Great Britain flow. So this is the bit when we talk about Northern Ireland to Great Britain, we talk about unfettered access. And unfettered access is about the recognition that Northern Ireland remains part of the UK customs territory, and that Northern Ireland businesses should continue to be able to access and sell their goods to customers right across the UK without facing any new barriers to doing that. And for the most part, that is what the unfettered access rules deliver. What they mean is that goods that are in free circulation in Northern Ireland, and just for clarity, free circulation in this context, we mean goods that have cleared through any customs processes and are no longer held under customs control in any way. So once they're in free circulation in Northern Ireland, they can move into the rest of the UK without having to do any new processes. So no customs declarations, there won't be any tariff applications, there's no new checks. There are some very limited exceptions to this. These were elements that were agreed between the UK and the EU as part of the joint committee discussions that happened in December. And they mean that there are some very limited circumstances where export declarations are needed as goods move out of Northern Ireland and into Great Britain. And this reflects that there are certain international conventions that both the EU and the UK are signatory to that require that we have a record and we have a way of tracking the movement of these kinds of goods. So there's a list on gov.uk which includes 14 prohibitions and restrictions where if goods move from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, you will need to make an export declaration. The thing I would say about that is 14 can sound like quite a lot. It's actually quite a niche list of things. It's goods that are covered by existing international conventions. So it's things like CITES goods, which is the movement of endangered animals. It's certain types of endangered fish species. It's things like ozone depleting gases. So it is things that are moved between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, but they're not kind of a very common thing. And it's the kind of thing that if you are moving those kind of goods, you are probably aware of that already, because you will already be complying with regulatory and other requirements in respect of those types of goods. So there is a list of those. This unfettered access provision is really focused on those direct movements of goods out of Northern Ireland into Great Britain. Now, one of the things we know is that a lot of businesses move their goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, but do so moving them via the Republic of Ireland. So some of this is about geography, some of it's about kind of the availability of different crossings and so forth. But we know that in some cases, businesses will want to be able to have the option to move the goods via the Republic of Ireland to Great Britain. Now, that does create more admin, because fundamentally, if the goods exit the island of Ireland out of Dublin or one of the other Irish ports, they are factually leaving the EU, and therefore we cannot use the unfettered access provisions to smoothen the journey in the same way we can when goods move directly from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So in those circumstances, there are additional processes that are needed. You have to make what's called an indirect export declaration. So that's an export declaration made in Northern Ireland into HMRC systems, but with a port of exit in the Republic of Ireland. And then that will allow the goods to be exported out of the Republic of Ireland, and then you would have to then do processes to import them into Great Britain. There's a staged controlled approach to imports into Great Britain, and these goods would also be able to use that same process, which allows you to delay the submission of declarations until July of this year in most cases. the free of charge trader support service that the government has set up to support with Northern Ireland declarations can assist with this. It does have a process that will do this on your behalf. So if this is something that you're looking at or is something that your business does, it is worth understanding what the trader support service can offer to help support businesses who are moving their goods in this way. One of the things that the UK government has introduced is if goods do move through the Republic of Ireland to come to Great Britain, if they are Northern Ireland goods, so they started off from Northern Ireland, they can claim an override of any tariff that would otherwise be chargeable on arrival in Great Britain. So the outcome will be the same, that no tariff is payable on the movement of those goods. However, the processes that we required would be different because factually they are moving through the EU's customs territory, and therefore there are different processes. And so that's where we are with those ones. Can we move to the next slide, please? So the position I've just set out about unfettered access, which looks at goods that are in free circulation getting unfettered access, that's the current position. That's the position that came in on the 1st of January. It is the way it's been put into legislation does include an anti-avoidance provision, which seeks to address anybody who might want to use that as a way of circumventing customs processes. So might consider, for example, rerouting goods through Northern Ireland in order to move goods into Great Britain without having to pay tariffs or interacting with UK customs processes. So there is an anti-avoidance provision that's a part of the existing legislation, but we know that it needs to be strengthened as well, so that those unfettered access provisions are more tightly focused on businesses in Northern Ireland and benefiting them, and less open to businesses elsewhere that may be seeking to take advantage of that. So later on this year, further legislation is going to be brought forward to identify more closely businesses in Northern Ireland and more tightly focus the unfettered access provisions on them, so it's only them who can benefit from them. So that is something that HMRC and our colleagues in Treasury are working on now. And as soon as we do have more information on that we can share and help businesses to understand what that will mean in the longer term, we will of course do that. But that's just a kind of, at the moment, we're just saying that to make you aware that the provision that exists at the moment and the way the legislation is structured at the moment is quite widely drawn, but it will be tightened and focused more closely on Northern Ireland businesses in the future. But what exactly that looks like, we will have to come back to you on once further work has been done. And can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so the next stage to move on to think about is the other kind of principal goods flow. And actually, this is the area where most of the work we are doing is focused, because the goods flow from Great Britain into Northern Ireland is where the principal changes to processes exist. So what the protocol requires is all goods entering Northern Ireland need to have both safety and security declarations. And these are also known as entry summary declarations, and they are part of how different administrations ensure that they are able to make risk-based interventions to ensure that goods that might have safety or security implications for that territory, we're able to intervene before they arrive before they arrive. And also, all goods coming into Northern Ireland need to have import declarations. So this is the kind of the biggest change, and the bit that I think is creating most of the kind of the discussion and the kind of the things that businesses need to adapt to and make changes to their systems and processes. Import declarations are in one part about being able to collect tariffs, and part of what this does is allows the charging of the EU's tariff where goods are at risk of moving into the EU. They also serve other purposes in terms of knowing the goods that are coming into Northern Ireland, so that regulatory processes and other regulatory checks can be applied. And that is about being able to maintain that regulatory alignment across the island of Ireland. And there are many facets to that. One of the key things that businesses will be aware of is the checks that are required on things like agri-food products to ensure that the food and other kind of plant-based products coming in meet all of the regulatory standards that are required to be able to travel across the island of Ireland. So customs declarations, cover a multitude of different things, including all of those. So they are required whether the goods are at risk or not at risk. So they're required in all cases. The submission of customs declaration is a digital declaration, and we are using processes that people who import goods already will be familiar with in terms of using simplified declarations and trying to sort of make those processes as simple as they can be. Although, I mean, I will acknowledge that making customs declarations is not a very simple thing, and there is for a lot of businesses, there's quite a lot of new work that will need to go into this. So one of the things that has been set up to do this, and there's a link in this slide, and we will share these slides afterwards so you can access them, is the Trader Support Service has been set up to help support businesses with the new declaration processes that they require for moving goods into Northern Ireland. So the Trader Support Service is a free-to-use service. It's available for businesses across the UK to use, and it has two essential functions. Firstly, it provides training and education, and this is all focused on helping businesses to understand the new processes, to understand what you need to do to complete customs declarations, the information you need, how the different trading terms that you might have between buyer and seller impact who needs to do what in those processes, the timing of declarations, all those elements. So one of the things the TSS is doing is that, and they're running a series of webinars and different sessions to help businesses with that. And we've got the link on the slide there to the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy. That's the main site that has been set up that has all of the educational materials on there. And every time they do new webinars, they are recorded and they are they're put onto that site. So even if you can't make the webinar, you can come back to it later. So that's one thing that the TSS does, and I would encourage anybody who hasn't yet registered with it to register with it, because you'll also get weekly updates about different developments and new processes that is really useful to see. The TSS also offers a declaration service, so it will make declarations on behalf of businesses to HMRC for both the safety and security declarations and the import declarations. It will also do export declarations in those circumstances when they are required that I talked about earlier. So the TSS is a really useful offering for businesses there. As I said, it is free of charge. The idea with the TSS is it's there to support businesses for the first period as we get to grips with these new requirements. The idea is in the longer term, it will be removed, and the idea is that the existing customs intermediary market will take over, and that will be take over kind of supporting businesses. But the initial period for the TSS is 2 years, and then that will be reviewed. So it is a really helpful thing for businesses in this first period. So again, if you are impacted by needing to make declarations for goods going into Northern Ireland, I would suggest getting in touch with the TSS and understanding its processes and how it can help with that. If we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. So before I go on to talk in a bit more detail about some of the things around the trade agreements and the at-risk process, one thing I will just sort of quickly touch upon is the use of transit for goods moving between Northern Ireland and the EU. So transit is a really useful customs facilitation that has been it's been in use for quite a number of years now, and it is a convention that covers all of the EU member states and other signatory countries. The UK signed up to it in its own right in anticipation of the leaving the EU, and it means that you can move goods around in any of the countries that are signed up to it under duty suspension, which delays the point at which customs processes need to be carried out. And this is really helpful if you are moving goods between two places where you have to cross through somewhere else, and you would otherwise have to carry out customs processes. So in terms of Northern Ireland, because of Northern Ireland's unique status within the single market. What transit means is if you move goods between Northern Ireland and the mainland EU, but they cross through Great Britain on the way, so you use the land journey by road, the use of transit means you wouldn't need to interact with customs processes as the goods enter Great Britain and then leave Great Britain again. And what it means is you can retain the union status of those goods from both ends of the journey. So transit is a really useful facilitation if you are moving goods between Northern Ireland and mainland EU in both directions. To use transit, the business starting the transit movement does have to be authorised, and it does have to hold a guarantee. In many cases, businesses who use transit quite a lot will normally get this set up for themselves, and they'll have all the relevant authorizations. Businesses who use it less frequently are more likely to use a freight forwarder who will have the necessary authorizations and the necessary guarantees already set up. So it's one of those things, if you're using a freight forwarder, an intermediary, of understanding what they can offer you in this space. But it is very helpful in both reducing the administration and also reducing the impact of potential tariffs if you are making that journey. So I just included it here just to highlight that that is an additional option. So can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so coming on now to think about the UK-EU Free Trade Agreement. So in the context of Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Protocol, the Free Trade Agreement between the UK and the EU is really helpful in as part of the kind of the options that are available to businesses who are moving goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, and when we're thinking about whether those goods are at risk. So if we kind of part of the thing that you do when you make a customs declaration for the goods moving into Northern Ireland is you have to determine whether those goods are at risk of moving into the EU. And there's quite a bit of criteria around that I'll go into later on in the slides. What the trade agreement does, or how the trade agreement is relevant in this particular area, is because it gives tariff-free access for UK goods into the EU. If the trade agreement could be used for your goods movement into Northern Ireland, what it means is the EU tariff, were one chargeable, would be zero. And in that case, there would be no tariff to charge whether the goods are at risk or not at risk under the rest of the rules. So it creates this situation where you have a zero tariff outcome in either case. So actually it becomes, we don't need to consider, are these goods at risk of moving into the EU? Are they not at risk of moving into the EU? Because whatever happens, they're either not at risk, they're an internal UK movement, no tariff is chargeable, or alternatively, they are at risk, but the EU tariff would be zero, so nothing is payable. So where the trade agreement could be used, it is a really helpful thing just to be able to kind of simplify some of this, and you don't need to kind of work through the at-risk determination, because you know that there would be no tariff chargeable in either scenario. So the way we're using the trade agreement in this context is we're looking at it as if the goods were moving into the EU. So we are looking at it in the context of what are the requirements for goods coming into the EU to use the trade agreement to claim a zero tariff. And that's why, as we've set out in the slide here, the preferential tariff under the trade agreement that you'd be looking to use is the EU's zero tariff, and that means the goods have to meet the UK origin requirements. So goods that are of UK origin or can meet UK origin requirements under the product-specific rules that are contained within the trade agreement can claim a zero tariff on entry to the EU. And that means, for the purpose of the Northern Ireland Protocol, they can be considered to be not at risk because there would be no tariff to charge. So that is obviously a really helpful facilitation, and you wouldn't then need to go on and consider the kind of wider thing. So if you are moving goods into Northern Ireland that can benefit from the trade agreement, then this is this would be one option that you would really want to think about. Can we go to the next slide, please? So one of the things about the trade agreement is it does require us to think about origin, and the origin of goods. I think the important thing to bear that the origin of goods is different from the status of goods for customs purposes. So goods have an origin, and origin works as it says on the slide here. Origin is used to determine the economic nationality of goods for customs processes. And you prove origin in order to access preferential tariff rates and other benefits that are under trade agreements. So goods that meet origin requirements can have things like the preferential tariff rates or other kind of beneficial trade terms, and it excludes goods that don't meet those origin requirements, so that you can't have third countries taking advantage of a trade agreement between two countries. So part of that is knowing what the origin of your goods are, and that can be quite simple if you wholly manufacture or wholly grow products in the UK. It can be quite simple, but if you have components that make up a product that come from different places, it can be more complicated, and the rules that apply to specific types of product are all different. And so you need to engage with what the particular goods that you're bringing in, what happens to them, and therefore whether that processing means that they are of UK origin, or whether origin is retained of where they have come from. So this is why origin is really, really important. And because we, on the context of the UK-EU trade agreement, we're talking about UK origin, we always need to be thinking, do these goods have UK origin? Can I use the trade agreement? I think one of the things that has been an area that a lot of businesses have struggled with is goods that come into Great Britain from the EU. Just because they are imported into Great Britain from the EU does not confer UK origin. So this is why I said origin is different to status. And they will have the status of being in free circulation in Great Britain, but if they have been imported from the EU and nothing has happened to them after that, they will still be EU origin goods. So that's the kind of the difference and the thing that needs to be worked out. And what that means is if those goods subsequently move into Northern Ireland, if they have EU origin, they cannot take advantage of the trade agreement, because the trade agreement working in that direction only confers the benefits onto UK origin goods. So there are other processes that businesses can think about in that to help mitigate any tariff impacts, but it's just worth being really, really clear that when we're talking about the application of the trade agreement, we're talking about goods that meet UK origin requirements. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we will share these slides afterwards, and this is just a slide that helps set out a little bit more kind of a flowchart of how establishing origin works, and the kind of evidence base that you would need in order to demonstrate origin. So there are things like supplier statements that are used to help demonstrate origin, and would be the supporting evidence that is used to in conjunction with your import declaration. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is quite a helpful summary just to kind of think about what we're talking about when we're looking at different goods flows into Northern Ireland and the different things that apply to each of them. So, so far, I mean, I have quite focused on the GB2NI part of it, and as we've kind of been through, goods that are not at risk do not pay any tariff, and goods that are not at risk on entry to Northern Ireland from Great Britain don't pay any tariff, because that is an internal UK movement. It's internal trade within the UK, and therefore there is no tariff. Goods that are at risk will pay the EU's tariff, but as I've mentioned, if you can use the trade agreement in order to claim a zero tariff, then there will be no tariff to pay. The same principles apply when you're looking at rest of world into Northern Ireland goods flow. So this is imports from third countries. Goods that are not at risk would pay the UK tariff. And obviously this will involve the payment of a tariff, because it's an import of goods into the UK from from the rest of world. So you are choosing here between two different types of tariff. Goods that are at risk will pay the EU's tariff, and that reflects the fact that they are at risk of moving on into the EU. However, in both of these, when considering both of these tariff options, you can look at things like, is there a free trade agreement between the UK or the EU and the country from which these goods have originated that I could take advantage of in looking at claiming lower tariffs, so preferential tariffs. So, again, it's the same as if you were importing directly to the UK, you would look at, is there a trade agreement between the UK and the country I'm bringing goods in from? Is that something that applies to the goods I'm bringing? Do I meet the origin requirements? Can I use that to claim a lower tariff? You do the same here, but you need to think about both the UK and the EU and what trade agreements are relevant to both of them. And just on the last box, we've just highlighted here that goods moving between Northern Ireland and the EU, there's no customs processes for any of those, and the at-risk test on entry to Northern Ireland, whether that's via Great Britain or from the rest of the world, that's the bit that determines the tariff that is paid. Once that is done, the goods can move onwards into the wider EU without needing to do anything further, because we have applied the test at the point they arrived in Northern Ireland, and that encompasses what may happen to them later. So can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so moving on to think about what is at risk. So at risk is a wholly new set of kind of rules that were brought in as part of the protocol. The one thing I will say is the at-risk rules were only agreed with the EU in the middle of December. So there are still some outstanding questions about some of the detail of how this works. And it is an area where businesses are still kind of working through a lot of the detail on. So, I mean, it is an area where I'd say, we don't yet have 100% of the detailed answers on it, but we are working through those very quickly. And we do plan to issue further guidance to help with this. So when we're thinking about the at-risk test, we have three categories. We have goods that are always at risk. We have goods that are automatically not at risk. And then we have goods that might be able to be declared not at risk. And you kind of need to work through these in order. Whilst there's no strict hierarchy, it is always easiest to work through these in order, because if the goods are always at risk, you then kind of don't need to go on and think about the other things. So it is always worth working through them in that logical step. So the goods that are always at risk, and these will, if goods are at risk, they will pay the EU's tariff. They are goods that are subject to commercial processing in Northern Ireland, and where the additional processing criteria that I'll talk about later does not apply. And goods from outside the UK and EU, so we're talking about imports from rest of the world here, where the EU duty is more than 3% greater than the UK duty. So in those two cases, goods will always be at risk and the EU tariff will be charged automatically. And so for a lot of manufacturing businesses, this is the kind of the area they get to, and many will then have the goods that they move into Northern Ireland will be at risk, and they will need to think about other options in terms of how you can mitigate the impact of tariffs. Then there is a category of goods that are automatically not at risk, and I have briefly mentioned this earlier, and this is where the UK duty is equal to or higher than the EU duty, the goods will automatically be not at risk. So if you are importing goods from rest of world into Northern Ireland, then you're comparing the EU tariff against the UK tariff, and you work out which is higher. And if the UK tariff is equal or higher, you have the goods are automatically not at risk, and the UK tariff will apply. Where you're moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, we come back to this thing that because there is no tariff on internal UK trade, this category can only apply where the EU tariff is 0, because you're comparing against 0 because there's no UK tariff. So this is the circumstance where, as I said earlier, if you're looking at the EU-UK trade agreement, if you can claim the preferential tariff under that, which is 0, you can come into this automatically not at risk category. And this is useful because you then don't need to then think about other criteria to declare goods not at risk. So, these are your first steps. If we then move on to the next slide, please. So you've then got the option of declaring that the goods are not at risk. And this would be where the next stage you would come to if you've considered the first two, but neither of those, the goods aren't always at risk and they're not automatically not at risk. You then have to look at, can I declare that they're not at risk? And this is where we've got the new UK trader scheme, which is an authorization that is issued by HMRC that allows you to declare that your goods are not at risk. And you can only declare them not at risk if they are in one of these categories, that specific categories. So that's goods for sale to or use by end consumers located in the UK. So that would include things like sale in retail stores, or goods for your business use in Northern Ireland. So the examples we have are things like a farmer purchasing a tractor, or a business purchasing stationery for use in its own business in Northern Ireland. You have to give evidence that those goods are used for that purpose, and that could be requested by HMRC as part of a compliance check. So if we go to the next slide, please. So in addition to those categories of goods that could be declared not at risk, there are some forms of processing where goods can be declared not at risk. So for small processors, if your annual turnover is less than £500,000 per annum, you can join the UK Trader Scheme and declare your goods not at risk. In addition, if you are part of one of these approved processing sectors, you join the UK Trader Scheme and declare goods for these particular purposes are not at risk. So those are listed on the slide there. One of the principal ones that kind of some of the really key ones are the sale of food to end consumers in the UK, which covers quite a lot of different food processing, manufacturing processes, but also construction projects in Northern Ireland, and also not-for-profit activities. So your application to the UK Trader Scheme, if you are in one of those approved processing sectors, needs to identify that you are applying for the scheme on the basis of being in one of those sectors. If we go to the next slide, please. So there is a criteria to being able to use the UK Trader Scheme. It's not just open to everybody. You must meet this criteria. The principal criteria is you either have to be established in Northern Ireland, or if you're established elsewhere, you must have customs operations carried out in the UK, have an indirect representative in Northern Ireland, and have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland where goods are sold to or provided for final use by end consumers. So that final part of the criteria there about having a fixed place of business is obviously a challenge in some supply chains, and we understand there's a lot of businesses who haven't arranged their supply chains in that way and don't meet that part of the criteria. So we do have a temporary approach in place that allows a business that doesn't have an existing fixed place of business in Northern Ireland to use the fixed place of business of their customer in order to meet this criteria to apply for the UK Trader Scheme. Now, this is only on a temporary basis, but it's designed to allow a business time to adapt its supply chains and consider what's the best way of either meeting this criteria in the future, or changing how the supply chain operates so that the declarant in respect of goods moving into Northern Ireland is perhaps someone else in the supply chain. So there is a temporary approach that is available now for businesses who don't meet all of that criteria, so don't meet that fixed place of business criteria, but need some time to adapt to these new requirements. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the last bit I really wanted to talk about today is what about those businesses who do have to pay tariffs? So their goods are at risk, they are charged the EU tariff. You know, that's obviously a challenge for them. There is, in addition to the options I've talked through there, businesses also have the option of claiming a waiver of a tariff that's chargeable. So this would be something you would think about where your goods are at risk and you are charged the EU tariff. At the moment, it's only available in respect of goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and it allows a business to claim a waiver of the tariff. It's essentially giving a government subsidy to the business. So it does come within the state aid regime for that reason, and therefore businesses do need to apply the state aid de minimis cap to what they claim under this scheme, and that's why it's measured in euros, because it is done under EU state aid rules. So a business can claim a maximum of £200,000 euros worth of state aid over a rolling 3-year period. So if a business wants to look at this waiver as something that might be an option for them, they need to understand both what waivers they may have already claimed under this scheme, but also any de minimis state aid they may receive through other government funding, other government subsidies or grants, and make sure that they stay within that cap. But it is an option that is available for business who would otherwise need to pay the EU's tariff. We are coming to the end of the slides now, and I'm also conscious of time, but I will just mention that there are other customs processes that might be relevant for businesses as well, who are have goods coming into Northern Ireland that are at risk and want to think about how they could mitigate tariffs. If you are in the processing sectors, then something like inward processing relief can be very beneficial, which would allow goods to move into Northern Ireland under duty suspension, be processed in Northern Ireland, and if they were then subsequently moving either to end consumers in Northern Ireland or moving back to Great Britain to customers there, or even being exported out of the UK altogether, that could be used as a way of mitigating a tariff charge while that processing was taking place. If you weren't using processing, say you were simply moving goods into Northern Ireland for end use, there are other customs processes as well where you don't meet the EU UK trade agreement terms that might help. So, for example, the use of transit or the use of customs warehousing can help to change the point in time which customs declarations are made, and therefore can create different outcomes in terms of whether an EU tariff is chargeable or not. So there are a number of different options that businesses need to think about, and what that does mean is it does mean there's quite a lot to understand in working out what the best option for your particular business is. It's not always a kind of a clear cut and dried, here's the one option that is best for your business. There are a range of options, and you do need to work through which ones are best for your business and which ones are the simplest to comply with as well, because there may be more than one that's relevant. So thank you very much. I will pause there, and Hilary and Aaron, if we want to go into questions, that would be great.
Thanks, Elly. Okay, so start with the first one we have got through. Do you think that the current simplified system of moving goods from GB to NI, just keeping goods moving initially, will be replaced? The question goes on to say current supplementary declarations are required, so the import process becomes fragmented. So would it not be easier to complete a full import declaration at the time of import, pretty much like all goods going from GB to ROI?
Yeah, so it is interesting that the kind of and just for context for other people on the call, the current process that the TSS is offering to businesses is this two-part process where you have a frontier declaration, which is followed later on by a supplementary declaration, and those two things together make up a full customs declaration, and are both required in order to complete the process. For a lot of businesses, it is simpler to do the two-part process because you need less information up front, and it means you have more time to submit the full data set. And it also goes hand in hand with also if there is a tariff to pay, paying that later on as well. However, there are some businesses who will say, well, I'd rather not do that, it's more admin, and I'd rather just do a full customs declaration up front. So that is already a possibility if you are making declarations yourself or through your customs intermediary for goods coming into Northern Ireland. You can just make a full customs declaration. It's not a service that the TSS offer at present. They are only offering something this two-part process. It may be something that we look to expand the TSS to offer in the future, but it's not part of the current offering. I would, say that if you are either making customs declarations yourself or using another customs intermediary to do that, then that is certainly something that you could talk to them about, whether it would be simpler just to use a full customs declaration process, because separating out the admin for some businesses does make it more complicated.
That's perfect. Next question. I stock product manufactured in Switzerland and sell to a client in Northern Ireland with no further processing. Can I supply it tariff-free to my Northern Ireland client?
Okay, so I'm going to assume that what you do is you import the stock from Switzerland into the UK, into Great Britain, and it's held in stock in Great Britain, and then later on it's moved to Northern Ireland. So if you have imported that stock into Great Britain, it comes back to this thing of the difference between status and origin. So if you've merely imported it into Great Britain, you haven't done anything else with it, it will have the origin it had on arrival in Great Britain. So that could be Swiss origin, just for example. If that is the case, so it's a Swiss origin, it's Swiss origin goods coming to Great Britain, imported to Great Britain, nothing happens to them then. When you subsequently move them into Northern Ireland, you cannot use the UK-EU trade agreement because those goods don't have UK origin. They have Swiss origin unless something else has happened to them to change that. So that means you couldn't use the trade agreement to claim that zero tariff. However, depending what's going to happen to those goods once they get into Northern Ireland, it may be possible to declare that they are not at risk using the UK trader scheme. Obviously, the business would need to be eligible and be authorised under the scheme, and the goods would need to be used for one of those purposes that I talked about, for which you can declare goods not at risk. So there's a number of things that you could work through there and look at. Alternatively, if you are moving, if there's no reason to store your goods in Great Britain for a little while, the other thing that you could look at doing is moving them under transit from Switzerland straight to Northern Ireland. You would obviously still have to do import declarations once they arrived in Northern Ireland, and that would apply the same as any other rest of world into Northern Ireland import. And you would apply the at-risk provisions in that, at that point in time, and you would be able to look to any trade agreements that both the EU and the UK have with Switzerland. So that's another option that you could think about that might come up with a different outcome if the UK trader scheme isn't suitable for you and there's no reason to hold goods in stock in Great Britain.
Lovely, Elly. Another question here. What would happen if I import product from China to the UK mainland, customs clear it, and I pay the relevant duties and taxes, and then transport it into Northern Ireland?
So this question is really similar to the Switzerland one, actually, as well. So if you bring your goods in and import them to Great Britain from China, you will, as you say, make your import declarations. You'll pay any relevant duties as they import into Great Britain. Your movement of those goods into Northern Ireland has to be considered quite separately. And so you're doing a new import process, and you need to think about, you can only think about the relevance of the UK-EU trade agreement at that stage. That's the only trade agreement that is relevant. So any other agreements that might be in place, they don't count when you're thinking about that GBNI bit of the process. So again, assuming that you've done nothing to your goods once they arrived in Great Britain, you've merely imported them. When you then move them into Northern Ireland, they still have that origin that they started with, so they're still Chinese origin goods. So you can't use the UK-EU free trade agreement in respect of that goods movement. So you need to come back to the, are the goods being moved into Northern Ireland for processing? If they are, then they may be automatically at risk. Or can I use the UK trader scheme in order to declare that the goods are not at risk? So am I in one of those, I'm either moving them in for sale to final consumers in Northern Ireland or for business use in Northern Ireland, or I may be in one of those approved processing sectors and I can use the UK trader scheme to declare that they are not at risk. If you can't declare that they're not at risk, then the EU tariff would be chargeable on entry to Northern Ireland, and that's the point in time where you would want to look at, is the waiver scheme applicable? Is that something I can use? There will always also be a scheme that's released later on in the year that will give the opportunity for a reimbursement of the tariff if you could later demonstrate that the goods that you brought into Northern Ireland and were at risk were consumed in Great Britain, in the UK. So those are you would need to look at other options for that as well.
Super, thanks, Elly. We'll just have time for 2 more questions from you just now, then we'll hand over to Stephen Kelly. We've got one here. If we have a warehouse in NI operated by a third-party logistics company, can this be our fixed address in NI to be able to comply with criteria for UKTS?
So under the temporary approach, you can look at an alternative address to meet the criteria for the UK trader scheme. The person whose address you would be looking to use would have to be able to meet the criteria for the UK trader scheme in their own right. So that's the important thing to think about. So you could look at that under the temporary approach. However, in the longer term, you wouldn't be able to do that because that is only part of the temporary easement that we brought in while the scheme is new. So if you did want to do that in the short term, you would also need to be thinking about how in the longer term you arrange things in a different way, or set up your operations differently so that you could meet the full criteria for the UK trader scheme.
That's perfect. Last question. At present, I manufacture a product in the UK and sell direct to clients in Northern Ireland, which will be tariff free. I currently do not have or need a local agent. Does the future require me to deal with a Northern Ireland agent?
So when you say an agent, I mean there's different options to how you manage the new processes that you have for moving goods into Northern Ireland, and some of that will depend upon whether you are the person who's responsible for making declarations for those goods moving into Northern Ireland. So the TSS is a really good service, and effectively that is operating as an indirect customs representative in Northern Ireland. So businesses using the TSS are already using a customs representative in Northern Ireland. Going forwards, you will, you or whoever's responsible for the declaration for those goods coming into Northern Ireland will need to ensure that customs declaration requirements are met. There are a number of ways of doing that. Obviously, there's the TSS now, but in the future, you may want to use another customs intermediary in order to do that, or some businesses may want to look about making customs declarations on their own, declaring into HMRC systems. So while there's no general obligation to have a customs agent in Northern Ireland, what you need to do is ensure that in your supply chain you have a mechanism and a means in order to make declarations for goods going into Northern Ireland. In addition, if you want to use the UK trader scheme and you are not established in Northern Ireland, one of the criteria is that you have an indirect customs representative in Northern Ireland. Now, it may be in the case of the person asking the questions that their goods they're moving are UK origin goods, so they can use the trade agreement to claim the zero tariff. So they don't need the UK trader scheme, in which case they might be able to kind of not worry about that. But obviously that depends upon all of the goods they're moving being UK origin goods, and therefore being able to use the trade agreement to claim a zero tariff rather than relying on using the trader scheme to declare the goods are not at risk.
Thanks ever so much for that. Now we can hand over to